morning of my wedding, I stood in the bridal suite of the Harrington Grand Hotel and thought, this is the last quiet moment I will ever have. I didn't know how right I was. My name is Paige. I was 31 years old, a licensed occupational therapist working at a rehabilitation center in Columbus, Ohio. I drove a sensible car, packed my lunch most days, and had spent the better part of 6 years building a life I was genuinely proud of. Not flashy, not inherited, built with my own hands, my own overtime shifts, my own stubborn refusal to ask anyone for anything. And then I met Brandon. Brandon Kellner was the kind of man who walked into a room and made it rearrange itself around him, not because he was loud, because he was certain about everything, what wine to order, which route to take, which future to plan. When he turned that certainty toward me, I felt like I'd been picked out of a crowd by a searchlight. It felt like being chosen. I know how that sounds now. We dated for 2 years. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in my own kitchen while I was making pasta, which I always thought was the most honest detail about him. He didn't need a rooftop or a violin quartet. He was comfortable enough with himself that a Tuesday kitchen felt sufficient. I said yes before the water finished boiling. His family was wealthy, old money from Cincinnati, the kind that had been in real estate for 3 generations. His father, I'll call him Mr. Kellner, because I never once felt comfortable calling him by his first name, owned a commercial property portfolio that included apartment complexes, retail spaces, and a set of 14 luxury condominiums downtown that the family had developed in the 90s. Brandon had been formally brought into the business 2 years before we met. He had equity. He had a trust. He had all the things that I was raised to believe you worked your whole life toward, and he'd had them since he was 25. I was not naive about what marrying into that family meant. I'd had the conversations with my mum, with my best friend Tess, with myself in the car on long drives. I knew there would be a learning curve. I knew his mother, I'll call her Mrs. Kellner, had opinions. She'd made that clear from the first dinner, when she'd smiled at my answer about my job and then immediately pivoted to asking Brandon about a property closing. I was furniture in that conversation. Decorative. But Brandon always said, she just takes time. She'll come around. She did not come around. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened on my wedding day, because I want you to understand it the way I lived it, not as a cautionary tale, not as a neat little lesson, but as a morning that started with champagne and hairpins and ended with me standing at a microphone in front of 240 people making 3 announcements that changed everything. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock. By 11, my bridal party was already in the suite. Tess, my cousin Brianna, and my childhood friend from Dayton, Kira. We had mimosas and a fruit platter and a playlist I'd spent embarrassingly long putting together. My mum sat in the corner chair doing her makeup and periodically tearing off and then fanning herself and saying, I'm fine. I'm 11:47. There was a knock at the door. Tess answered it. She came back with a look on her face I didn't know how to read, and behind her walked Mrs. Munnis, Kellner and Brandon's older sister, Diane. We need a few minutes alone with Paige, Mrs. Kellner said, not a question. It never was with her. Tess looked at me. I nodded, just slightly. She ushered Brianna and Kira out with the patience of someone who has been a good friend for a very long time. My mum started to stand. You too, please, Mrs. Kellner said. My mum looked at me. I said, It's okay, Mum. She laughed. I don't think she believed me. Mrs. Kellner sat down in the chair my mother had just vacated like she'd been invited to do exactly that. Diane stood slightly behind her, holding an envelope. Neither of them commented on the room, the flowers, the dress I was already wearing. Mrs. Kellner looked at me the way she always did, like she was taking inventory. We've had our family attorney draw up a prenuptial agreement, she said. It's straightforward. Brandon needs to sign it as well. He'll do that before the ceremony. We just need your signature first. I didn't say anything for a moment. I wasn't told about this, I said. No, she agreed, without apology. Diane stepped forward and held out the envelope. I didn't take it immediately. Mrs. Kellner, the ceremony is in 2 hours. My guests are already arriving. This is a business matter, she said, and it should have been addressed sooner. I'll admit that, but it needs to be addressed now. I'll admit that, but it needs to be addressed now. I took the envelope. I opened it. I read. The agreement was 4 pages. In plain terms, I would have no claim to any Kellner family assets in the event of divorce, including the 14 downtown condominiums that had been partially transferred into Brandon's name the previous year. In return, and this is the part that made me read it twice, I would be jointly liable for 50% of any business debts incurred by Brandon or the Kellner LLC during our marriage. I want you to sit with that for a second. No inheritance rights to anything they owned. Full liability for half of any debt they ran up. I set the papers down on the vanity table. This isn't a prenuptial agreement, I said. This is a liability transfer. Mrs. Kellner smiled, and it was the kind of smile that doesn't involve the eyes at all. It protects the family's assets. That's standard. For you, I said. It protects your assets while assigning me your risk. Paige. She leaned forward slightly. I'm going to be very direct with you. Brandon is not going to walk away from this family over a signature. He loves you, I believe that, but he will not choose you over his inheritance, and I think on some level you already know that. You can sign this, have a beautiful wedding, and we can all move forward. Or you can make this difficult, and we can find out together what Brandon decides. Diane was looking at the carpet. I picked up the papers. I read them a second time more slowly. I signed. Mrs. Kellner took the papers without a word of thanks, stood up, and she and Diane left. I sat at the vanity for probably 4 minutes without moving. Then I stood up, walked to my overnight bag in the corner of the room, reached into the inside zipper pocket, and took out a manila envelope I put there 3 weeks earlier. Let me explain that. 6 weeks before the wedding, I'd been at Brandon's apartment, helping him go through some papers for a joint bank account we were opening. He'd stepped out to take a call, and I'd absent-mindedly flipped through a folder on the counter that I assumed was account paperwork. It wasn't. It was a transfer agreement. A stock transfer specifically, moving a significant equity stake in 2 of the Kellner condominiums from Brandon's grandfather's trust to Brandon's personal holdings. The transfer had been backdated by almost 8 months, and at the bottom on the signature line for the trust's co-trustee, which was Brandon's uncle, a man named Mr. Hargrove who lived in Phoenix, there was a signature that looked, to my untrained eye, exactly like Brandon's handwriting, not his uncle's. I didn't say anything. I took a photo of it on my phone. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself there was probably an explanation. I went home that night and cried in my shower for 20 minutes. And then I called a friend from college who'd become a securities attorney in Chicago, and I described what I'd seen without naming anyone, and she said, very carefully, that what I was describing, if accurate, sounded like it could constitute trust fraud. I printed the photo. I put it in a manila envelope. I put it in my overnight bag. I told myself I would never need it. Here's the thing no one tells you about. Moments like that. There's no music. There's no cinematic clarity. I was sitting at a vanity in a hotel bridal suite in my wedding dress, with mascara I hadn't cried off yet and a mimosa I hadn't finished, looking at a manila envelope and thinking, very calmly, wow. I went and got Tess. I showed her the envelope. I told her what was in it. I told her what had just happened with Mrs. Kellner. I told her what I was thinking about doing. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you still want to marry him?" I thought about it. Genuinely. I wanted to marry who I thought he was, I said. She nodded. Okay then. She pulled out her phone and called the hotel AV coordinator. The ceremony was in the Harrington Grand's main ballroom, a room with 12-foot ceilings and 2 projection screens on either side of the altar that the hotel used for corporate events. I'd originally arranged to use them for a photo slideshow during the reception. Tess asked the AV coordinator if we could put them to a different use. He said he'd need about 15 minutes. I walked down that aisle. I want to be clear about that. I walked down on my father's arm in a dress I'd spent 4 months finding, with 240 people standing for me, and Brandon waiting at the end of it looking like he meant every bit of it. And maybe he did. That's the part I've never been able to fully resolve. Maybe he genuinely loved me and genuinely believed that what his family had built was worth protecting, and those 2 things simply could not coexist with my own survival. The ceremony had reached the moment just before the exchange of vows. Pastor Henley was transitioning between sections when Mrs. Kellner, seated in the front row, rose from her chair. "Before we continue," she said, loudly enough for the room, "there's a brief family matter that needs to be addressed." I heard murmuring behind me. I heard my mother make a sound. Mrs. Kellner spoke to the room like she was chairing a board meeting. She explained, with remarkable composure, that the Kellner family had certain assets that predated the marriage and that a prenuptial agreement had been signed that morning to protect those assets. She said it as though it were simply a formality being announced. Transparent. Routine. Just so everyone understands, she finished. The family's property holdings remain intact. She sat back down. The room was very quiet. Brandon had turned toward me. His face was, I don't know exactly how to describe it, ashamed maybe, but not surprised. He wasn't surprised, and that told me everything I needed to know. I looked at Pastor Henley. "May I have a moment?" I said. He nodded, visibly unsure. I walked to the small podium that had been set up at the side of the altar. Not the main microphone, but the one the wedding coordinator used for announcements. I had asked for it to be placed there that morning. Tess had taken care of the rest. I turned to face the room. "I want to share a few things," I said, "and I want to apologize in advance to everyone who drove a long way today." I took a breath. First, this morning, 2 hours before this ceremony, I was presented with a prenuptial agreement that I had no prior knowledge of. I was given no time to consult an attorney. The agreement entitled me to no portion of the Kellner family assets in the event of divorce, while making me equally liable for 50% of any debts the Kellner business incurred. I signed it because I was told that if I didn't, Brandon would choose his inheritance over our marriage. I want the people in this room who love me to know that that happened. Silence. The specific, concentrated silence of 240 people not moving. Second, I nodded toward the back of the room where the AV booth was. The 2 projection screens lit up. On them was a high-resolution scan of the document I'd photographed 6 weeks earlier, the stock transfer agreement, the backdated date, and the signature on the co-trustee line. "This is a document I found in my fiancé's apartment 6 weeks ago. It is a transfer of equity from a family trust into Brandon's personal holdings. The co-trustee signature, as you can see, does not belong to the actual co-trustee, who I have been told has been in assisted living in Phoenix for the past 14 months and has not signed any legal documents in that time. I've sent a copy of this to my attorney. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not making any accusations. I'm simply making sure this document is no longer a secret." I heard a chair scrape. I heard Mrs. Kellner say something low and sharp that I couldn't make out. Brandon hadn't moved. He was looking at the screen. "Third," I said. I reached into the small fold of my bouquet. Yes, I had put the envelope there, because I'm apparently someone who hides documents in flowers now, and I removed a single folded paper. I held it up. "This morning I signed a prenuptial agreement under duress, without counsel, with no prior notice. My attorney, who I called from this hotel bathroom at 12:30 this afternoon, informs me that an agreement signed under those conditions has significant grounds for challenge. I am formally and publicly withdrawing my signature. There is no prenup." I set the paper down on the podium. "I'm not marrying Brandon today. That's not a decision I'm making in anger. It's a decision I'm making because I deserve a partner who would have told his mother no. A long time ago." I stepped back from the microphone. The room sounded like a gymnasium between periods, this rushing, swelling noise of everyone turning to everyone else at once. I saw my mother stand up. I saw Tess already moving toward the aisle. I saw Brandon's father put his hand over his mouth. Brandon took one step toward me. "Pedro, I hope you make the right choices going forward," I said. "I genuinely do, but they don't involve me." I walked back up the aisle. My dad fell into step beside me without a word, which is one of the things I love most about him. My mum caught up on my other side. Behind me I heard Mrs. Dowtrey. Kellner's voice rise and then be cut off by someone. I later found out it was Brandon's aunt who'd apparently had thoughts about Mrs. Kellner for some time. Tess met us in the lobby. She handed me a room key. "I already had your bag moved to a different room," she said. "3rd floor, quieter." We went upstairs. Tess unzipped my dress. My mum ordered room service. My dad sat on the edge of the bed watching the football game with no sound on, which is just how he processes things. I ate half a club sandwich and cried for a while and then fell asleep in the hotel robe while Tess watched reality TV with the volume low. That was the night. The weeks after were not simple. There's no version of this story where I tell you it was fine immediately and I bounced back like nothing happened, because that would be a lie and I think you deserve better than that. I had a lot of mornings where I woke up and the first thing I felt wasn't relief. It was grief. Grief for the version of things I'd wanted. Grief for the Brandon I thought I'd known before I understood what he was willing to let happen. My attorney, the real one, the one I'd actually retained for the property review I'd never told Brandon about, sent a formal notice to the Kellner family attorney regarding the document I presented. I was advised not to discuss specifics publicly, so I won't. What I will tell you is that Brandon's uncle reached at his care facility in Phoenix, confirmed through his own legal representative that he had not signed any documents relating to the trust in over a year. I don't know what happened after that. I removed myself from that situation and let the people who get paid to care about it take it from there. The prenup was moot. We never got married. There was nothing to enforce. The thing people keep asking me, the thing I've turned over in my own head more times than I can count, is when I knew. When did I actually know that it was going to end the way it did? Honestly, I think some part of me knew the moment I took that photo in his apartment. I think that's why I took it. I think that's why I kept it. The brain is very good at protecting you from information you're not ready to act on yet. I wasn't ready. I needed more time to be sure, and then Mrs. Kellner walked into my bridal suite and made sure for me. I'm not angry at myself for not leaving sooner. I was in love. I was building something I wanted. I'm a person, and that's what people do. We try to make things work until the moment we understand they can't. There's nothing weak about that. The only thing I know for certain is that I was not going to sign my name to a document that treated me like a liability transfer and then walk back down the aisle like it hadn't happened. I was not going to do that. Some people, when I tell this story, say I was brave. I don't really feel like that's the right word. Brave implies I wasn't scared, I was terrified. I was standing at a microphone in a wedding dress in front of my grandmother and my college roommate and my co-workers and my childhood pediatrician, who was somehow on Brandon's guest list, and I was shaking in a way I hope didn't show on my face. But I did it anyway, and I think that's a different thing than brave. I think that's just knowing that you will not be able to look at yourself in the mirror if you don't. I still live in Columbus. I still work at the same rehabilitation center. I got a dog, a 3-year-old mutt named Biscuit, who believes strongly in the healing power of taking up the entire couch. Tess and I have dinner most Thursdays. My mum calls every Sunday and has, mercifully, stopped bringing Brandon up. I don't know what happened to Brandon. I've made a deliberate choice not to look. That might change someday. Right now, it feels like the healthiest version of Forward. What I know is this. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to change it at the worst possible moment, in the most public possible way, surrounded by 240 people who bought flights and wrapped gifts and drove through October rain to watch you make a choice. You are allowed to look at the life that's being offered to you and say, quietly, clearly, without cruelty, this is not what I agreed to. Nobody can take the microphone away from you once you're already holding it. That's the thing they don't put in the prenup. I've thought about what I would say to someone going through something like this. Someone sitting in a hotel bridal suite with a signed document on the vanity and a manila envelope in their overnight bag, trying to figure out if the thing they're about to do is courageous or just catastrophic. I don't have a clean answer. What I have is this. Every choice Mrs. Kellner made that morning was the result of a long pattern of choices she'd made before it. You don't walk into your future daughter-in-law's bridal suite 2 hours before her wedding with a liability transfer dressed up as a prenup, unless you have spent years believing that the people around you will absorb whatever you hand them and say thank you. That belief doesn't come from nowhere. It gets built slowly, by 100 small moments when no one pushed back. Brandon didn't push back. The family attorney didn't ask harder questions. And I, for 2 years, smiled through dinners where I was treated like furniture and told myself she would come around. I was wrong, and my being wrong for 2 years is part of how we got to that room. That's not self-blame, that's just cause and effect, which I think is one of the most important things a person can learn to see clearly. Not to punish themselves with it, but to read it honestly. What we allow continues. What we document matters. What we prepare for, quietly, without announcing it, without drama, is often the only thing standing between us and a situation we can't recover from. I took that photo in Brandon's apartment because something in me understood, before my conscious mind was ready to, that I needed it. I kept it because I wasn't ready to act yet, but I wasn't willing to be completely defenseless either. That's not clairvoyance. That's just what paying attention looks like when the stakes are high enough. Tess handed me a room key that afternoon without my asking. She'd already moved my bag. She'd already called the AV coordinator. She didn't ask me if I was sure. She just moved. That is what genuine support looks like. Not reassurance, not sympathy, but action taken on your behalf before you finish deciding you need it. I think about how different that day would have looked without her, and I try to be that person for the people in my life now. What I keep coming back to, though, is the microphone moment itself. Not as a triumph. It didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like my hand shaking inside a bouquet, but as a decision. The decision to say the true thing out loud in a room full of people who might have preferred I didn't. There is something that changes in you when you do that. Not forever, not completely, but something recalibrates. You find out that you can. And once you know that, you can't unknow it. I'm not the same person I was at 11:47 that morning when Mrs. Keller sat down in my mother's chair. I don't think I'm harder. I think I'm clearer. About what I'm worth. About what I'll sign. About what I will and will not hand back to someone just because they asked with enough confidence. That clarity cost me a wedding, a relationship, and a version of the future I'd spent 2 years planning. I won't pretend that's nothing, but I also won't pretend the price wasn't worth it. Some things you only learn by being pushed past the point where you can pretend. I'm glad I stopped pretending.